We'll move on to Savile Row. This is a new special policy area that's just coming through in the core strategy. Essentially, should we establish a set of criteria to allow the relocation of bespoke tailoring? And if so, what should it include? One example would be relocation of uses should only take place as part of land use swaps within the special policy area. And we'd take into account the visibility of the workroom, so we'd be looking at basement and ground level premises. Are there any other criteria that anybody wants to put forward with regards to how we manage Savile Row and the bespoke tailoring that exists there?
Yeah, Matt Humphreys on behalf of the Pollen Estate. I think it's firstly just to say that we're very supportive of the special policy area and encouraging bespoke tailoring and protecting it. And I think the key behind the logic for the basement and ground floor location is that previously there were some units at the upper levels which, there was actually a lot of tailoring businesses there, but you couldn't see them. So there were basement levels which were vacant and really didn't add to the character of that street, which is, world famous. So I think that's a key point. I think the main thing with this is really just seeking flexibility, because unfortunately a lot of these businesses, what you might define as a tailoring unit, I know you set out that it's a sui generis use, but from a strict planning point of view, we've always taken the view, which we believe correct, and actually set out in some of your tailoring reports, that the tailoring use is actually B1 light industrial use, because it effectively constitutes a manufacturing process that can be carried out in a residential area, which it is. Therefore, I think that that's an issue that needs to be addressed in terms of defining what is tailoring, just to allow that occupiers and landowners can work together with the council and achieve a sort of beneficial result for all involved. So I think it was really just sort of picking up those points, really.
I think I'll just add to that. If tailoring, bespoke tailoring, was categorised as a B1 use, we would have absolutely no control over them becoming offices. Absolutely no control at all. Whereas if they're categorised as sui generis uses, we can actually control that use. That might be something you want to consider in terms of how they're defined.
Yeah, I think, especially with the ambition to relocate them to the ground and basement levels, from a market point of view, that's not something you'd want to have. It wouldn't be desirable to have office uses on the ground floors of an active frontage. So, I don't think that's a big problem. Also, there's ways to deal with it. You could have some sort of condition saying that each application coming forward or each change or swap would have to always demonstrate that there's no net loss of tailoring floor space.
Well, if you categorise tailoring floor space as B1C, we would not be able to control net loss of tailoring floor space, because anyone could just come and put the tailors out and put an office in. So there would be absolutely no control. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this is a special policy area to look at tailoring, and if we do define tailoring as B1C, as you've suggested, then it would make this special policy area meaningless, in all honesty, because from my understanding, you wouldn't be able to protect the tailoring use. It could change to any other B1 use.
I think it poses the question that there's clearly a need for the council to work with the Savile Row Group to try and agree a definition of tailoring. And I agree it's not a straightforward point, but I think it's something that the council should lead on this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor.
Realistically speaking, one should remember that I understand that as far as the tailoring goes, although the fitting and the measuring might be done in the tailor shop, in fact, all the actual tailoring is done elsewhere.
Perhaps we could have a comment here.
Well, hang on just a minute. I don't believe that to be so. And what's more, if it is so, some of it is because the basements are not of a quality where today, in working standards, it couldn't be used. But I happen to know that, because I took a particular interest in this original designation, that a lot of the work is done there. It was suggested at one time they're all going off to China to finish off, or in other parts of London, East London. But I know my links with what's now called the University of the Arts, which was in the College of Fashion, in part of the London Institute. We took a great interest in that area and would do anything, if anything we can do, like the Harley Street precinct. It is a name which is part of London's heritage.
Okay, thank you.
I might just add to that. I'm Mark Henderson from Savile Row, Bespoke and Gives and Hawkes and various other companies. There are in fact about 100 working tailors on Savile Row now. There are in fact, the last count there were 34 people in training. We have a steady stream of people from colleges and so on coming through. So it's not only just commercially does it work, but it has a much, much broader context for the British fashion industry and so on. And the other point I'd like to make is that perhaps I don't know a great deal about Harley Street other than its reputation is clearly great, but one of the comments was that practitioners on Harley Street may well prefer to go and work in a hospital or wherever it is where they've got all the facilities, but actually Savile Row is where the facilities are. So the viability of Savile Row depends on having a cluster of businesses, and every single tiny square foot of workroom space that ceases to be workroom space means that there's a little bit less and it just becomes less and less viable. So it's actually worked pretty well in the last couple of years. We've had a good relationship with Pollen. We certainly absolutely support the development of really high quality office space in the area. We certainly absolutely abhor the thought of general retail moving into the street, and I think that's out of the question. But we'd certainly like to do whatever we can to help with the development of good quality office space. But I do agree with your concerns about B1 usage and so on, and I think every case has to be looked at on its own merits, and there is a clear footprint of what currently makes bespoke tailoring on the road. So I'm sure we can come to an agreement on that in due course.
Okay, thank you. Okay, should there be flexibility in this policy that would allow changes of use to result in a legal agreement that could be invested in the street? So this is really looking at the relationship between tailoring, the tailoring floor space that's provided at the moment, and whether or not changes of use should be accompanied by the provision for improvements to the public realm, improvements to the street generally. Are there any comments on that? No? Okay. In accordance with the existing mixed-use policy in the UDP, should increases in commercial uses be matched by equivalent uplift in residential floor space within Savile Row, or should the priority instead be bespoke tailoring workrooms? So what would the relationship be with the mixed-use policy, which we discussed towards the end of the first session? Does anyone want to comment on that?
I mean, I think this follows on naturally from having a special policy area. Certainly, the estate would be very happy to support the idea that you don't have to put the residential here. You look to put other uses which may be better suited to the street. And I think that if you have a special policy area, you ought to support it in that way. So I think we need a varied policy in respect to mixed policy here.
Okay, thank you. Hugh at the back.
I wasn't going to comment on the specifics of Savile Row. There's others well placed to do that, but it was more a consistency point, which is that if you take this formula in Savile Row, which I'm sure may well have its merits, one needs to think through then how it also applies, as I think you propose, in the West End Special Retail Policy area, where you have the same idea, but the way it's put is slightly different. So all I'd say is there's a kind of consistency point here that may run elsewhere in the UDP that would need to be looked at as well, perhaps.
So you're saying apply it not just within the other special policy areas, but also have a consistent approach to Westborough?
Yes, you floated something similar, but you express it differently in the West End Special Retail Policy area, because again, particularly it came out around the Oxford Street East area about are you going to, instead of the residential, promote public realm or shopping environment or other objectives. So I think looking at the question of priorities, and how that interfaces with mixed-use policy may not apply just in Savile Row. That was my
So
my
you're
point.
thinking a consistent approach. Just for those who don't know, the West End Special Retail Policy Area is established through the London Plan. We've carried it through in the core strategy, and it applies to really Oxford Street, Regent Street, Bond Street, and Soho and Covent Garden. So it's that area there, and we discussed it at the retail workshop earlier. So you're saying consistent approach. And would you also support it for the other special policy areas, a consistent approach?
I think it depends what they are. I mean, getting back to what we talked about earlier about Portland Place, I don't think the same point would apply.
Right.
But all I'm saying is if there is a very specific objective for a special policy area that has indirectly an economic cost, and they usually do, otherwise you wouldn't intervene in the planning system, then that cost may have a consequence for other public policy objectives you're trying to pursue.
Okay,
If
thank
that
you.
makes sense.
Yeah.